Most hunters of Yharnam fall to beasts or to madness. Gehrman's end is stranger. His life is suspended in an endless twilight, bound to a dream that outlived every real battlefield. He is not remembered by monuments in the waking world, but by gravestones in a realm that isn't quite alive. Why did the man who taught others to survive the hunt become its most eternal victim? Tonight, we step softly through the corridors of lore that describe his burden, his loss, and his quiet presence at the edge of Bloodborne's final dawn. Hey guys, it's the Sleep Wizard, back to guide you into dreamland with lore stories about your favourite games. Tonight, we'll be exploring the haunting tale of Gehrman, the first hunter. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let the story carry you off to sleep. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what time you're heading to bed tonight. I'd love to hear where in the night this story finds you. Let's begin. Few pause to wonder what shadows shaped the man before he became the first hunter. The records are thin, and Gehrman's earliest years remain obscured. What we know instead is the intellectual storm that brewed around him. A quarrel at an old institution by the lake, where lofty windows looked down onto waters that seemed always still. This was Bergenwerth, a house of study where silence was treasured, but whispers of the old blood worked their way through wooden halls. At its centre sat Master Willem, urging his students to caution. He spoke not of power won through blood, but of eyes, insight, vision, patience. His lessons travelled like drifting incense, warning against a path that could not be undone. But another voice rose stronger than caution. Lawrence, once Willem's student, broke from his master's side. He saw in the old blood not a snare but a salvation. Where Willem counselled hesitation, Lawrence declared necessity. Disease was everywhere, frailty was certain, and the blood offered answers too potent to ignore. From this refusal to wait, the healing church was born, rising not far from the city streets that would carry its promise outward. What began as philosophy hardened into institution, and in the shadow of this split, Gehrman steps into history, neither a scholar in the study nor a preacher in the pulpit, but a figure tied to practice. The exact reasons for his shift are not recorded. There is no surviving moment where we see him step cleanly from the lake stone cloisters into the workrooms of iron and oil. What the fragments suggest is that he moved where need called. The healing church, intent on wielding the blood, required defenders, those willing to meet what its rituals stirred awake. Gehrman became the craftsman of that necessity. His blades and devices show the hands of a man who did not speak theory but answered crisis. Imagine that change as you walk through hushed corridors lined with tall shelves. Lamps burn low, quills scrape parchment, but behind those sounds lies another one, the faint clink of metal, the pivot of a hinge tested in silence. While Willem's students traded arguments in lamplit halls, Gehrman answered differently. He forged weapons supple enough to shift shape when human forms gave way to monstrous ones. His craft was not printed into texts, not raised in sermons. It lived in straps, rivets, and sharpened gear. Those who trained under him did not stand like knights in pride. They moved quietly, their tools folding and breaking apart at the pace of strikes. There was nothing ceremonial here. Their arms were light enough to turn mid-blow, heavy enough to cut what should not walk Yharnam streets. Every weapon bore the logic of someone who had stood too close to the question of what blood creates, and who refused to answer with ideas alone. The workshop that he established echoed this language of survival. Picture its floorboards bowed by iron filings, scraps of leather hung across beams damp with wax smoke. Contraptions dangled from hooks, steel threaded with cords, waiting for a handler. At night apprentices carried them away, silent beneath cloaks, practicing not rhetoric but reaction. The rhythm of their drills echoed Gehrman's instruction. Swiftness, precision, and silence more persuasive than words. In time, his role became clear. He was not Willem's faithful disciple, nor Lawrence's zealous herald. Instead, he stood in the grey space between schism and church, turning disputes into movements of the hand, clashes of blade and beast. It is here that his identity hardened. He was not merely shaped by the debates of greater men. He was the answer that emerged when philosophy and faith fell short. Yet the question lingers. Why him? Why was he the one who gathered iron and strap, mastering movements that most could not imagine? The sources yield no certainty. Some say loyalty held him, perhaps to Lawrence, whose church needed defenders. Others whisper of fear that he acted because someone must. Whatever the cause, it lies veiled. What remains visible is the path he carved, a workshop rising from the fractures of Byrgenwerth's quarrel, a legacy of bloodshed born from intellectual silence. As his story carries forward, that workshop becomes more than a shadow at the edges of the healing church. It stands as the cradle of the hunt itself, the first room where theory gave way to practice, and it waits still, in quiet attics and rooms emptied of footsteps, where Gehrman's labour lingers in wood and steel. The workshop of the first hunter was more than a room of wood and rafters. It was the hidden place where Gehrman's craft joined the church's need. Gehrman founded the workshop as a secretive armoury and training ground, producing hunters when pulpit or scripture offered no defence. Its workbenches supported straps, chisels and fragments of steel, but what took shape under his hand was not only weaponry, it was a discipline, a rhythm that would guide those who followed him. The tools borne here were never meant for triumphal display. A folding saw that shifted shape with a sharp click, an axe that reached outward with sudden force, a pistol raised not to aim but to interrupt. These devices spoke of raw necessity. Their design was stripped of ornament, meant only to break a charge or slip through hide that once belonged to men. For the hunters who carried them, each transformation was a decision: adapt or be lost. Yet the weapons alone did not teach survival. Gehrman bound them into a practice of motion, a rhythm that felt closer to breathing than to swordplay. Hunters learned to step inside chaos, to meet a beast's lunge with the stillness of a pistol shot, that single sharp sound halting fury long enough for one blade to finish the work. Defence here was never about walls or shields. It was timing, reflex balanced at the edge of disaster, a conversation between steel and instinct that left no pause for error. The air of the workshop carried more than steel and smoke. You could almost sense the heaviness of wax dripping from tall candles, their glow falling across fading gravestones carried into the room as reminders. The etchings blurred with melted light, but their meaning was unmissable. This path ended not in glory, but in graves. Leather hardened with oil hung beside ropes ready for fastening. The floor gave soft groans beneath the boots, and through every step ran the smell of wet stone dust and sweat. To enter such a room was to be warned before even lifting a blade. Students absorbed not only tools but manner. Gehrman's hands taught them to shift shape mid-strike, to let silence wait on their muscles until rage sped past, then to answer with sudden ferocity. The discipline grew less like a lesson and more like an inheritance, a style carried in the muscle of each hunter who came after. It was not written or spoken. It was embodied, pressed into motion until recognition of danger became as natural as drawing breath. Still, the workshop was not a place of celebration. Every advance it produced carried a shadow. Blades returned bearing proof of futility, garments stained, fragments of what could not be saved. Each hunter apprenticed, there added to the cost, each grave marker multiplying across the city and beyond. Gehrman guided them with care, but what they gained was only the postponement of loss. His burden was to witness the repetition, the cycle that consumed his students without breaking. Over time, his place within the workshop shifted. He became less artisan and more keeper, his tools binding him as tightly as they armed the hunters. Every weapon fashioned tethered him deeper to the role, each return to the workroom turning obligation into weight. The benches, the rafters, the gravestones, none of it allowed freedom. The workshop produced survival, but it also produced the chain that tried its master. Among the hunters who walked this path, Ludwig stands remembered most clearly. His name endures as the church's first champion, the one who carried Gehrman's craft onto battle lines as the scourge spread through the city. When he raised his weapon, it bore not only his strength, but the training and tradition whispered beneath the workshop's roof, the same rhythm that Gehrman had given his earliest pupils. Ludwig was not alone in this, but his legacy ties the hidden room above Gehrman directly to the wider struggle. The story of the workshop ends not with triumph, but with that weight pressing heavier on its founder. Gehrman remained among its tools and shadows even as years dulled his hands, and there, bound by the cycle he had created, his path turned away from the city and its rooftops. What followed was unlike the darkened rooms of the waking world, a place touched by moonlight and silence, where flowers lay open under a sky that never changed. It was the setting for his next chapter, one that would not resemble a grave or a resting place at all. Every hunter eventually gives their body to the earth, but Gehrman opened his eyes to something else. No soil pressed around him, no silence wrapped his last breath. Instead, he found himself among flowers that never withered, under a sky that lingered forever between dusk and dawn. White blossoms swayed without end, and the pale moon above them held unmoving, constant, unchanging, as though cut from light itself. The first impression was gentle, almost restful, but in its quiet you can already feel the unease. This place welcomed him into a silence that seemed like peace, while hiding the truth beneath its calm surface. The hunter's dream stretches on with its endless garden of blossoms, each petal brushing softly yet leaving no trace of seasonal wind. To walk it is to notice what is absent. No smell of iron, no soot from the city, no pulse of decay. For a hunter newly dragged here, it appears like a sanctuary, a reprieve from blood and cobblestones. Yet the longer you stand, the more that silence begins to press in. It gives comfort, but it also feels like a veil. A veil always conceals something. The lore suggests it was the pale moon presence that gave this dream its form, and that in making it real, Gehrman himself became tethered here. How it chose him, no record explains. But its influence folded around him like a net, pulling the first hunter into this calm eternity. There is no waking on the other side of such a tether. For Gehrman, this dream does not embrace gently. It holds him like a chain no one hears, but which he feels at every moment. He cannot leave, and he cannot rest. Within the dream stands a version of his workshop, shaped after the one he once built in Gehrman. Yet it does not stand whole. When you imagine its roof lines and wood, they are already charred, timber smouldering as though from a fire endlessly paused mid-burn. Tools lie scattered upon scorched benches, papers curling to ash, air faint with the crackle of flames that never finish consuming. It is a room arrested in ruin, carried into dream so the wound could never close. Behind the bright field of blossoms the workshop lingers, its ruin made permanent so Gehrman feels it always. The dream carries more than flowers and fire. This is where gravestones gather. They dot the field in long rows, some leaning heavy where roots have begun to clutch their bases, others nearly swallowed by the soil itself. Hundreds of them stand, blank or nearly rubbed away, offering no story but endurance. Each one marks a hunter carried to the end of their cycle, returned to stone beneath skies that never change. They spread like a silent congregation around Gehrman, a congregation of the fallen that no sermon can address. Surrounded by these markers, he bears witness to every loss, his legacy written not in triumphs, but in these stones. And there, moving between the workshop and the gravestones, Gehrman's presence is heard more than seen. The rolling complaint of his wheelchair presses into the silence, wheels crossing the old boards with a sound that replaces clocks, seasons, even years. It becomes the rhythm of the dream, the one reminder that something still moves amid stasis. A creak, then a halt, then another slow advance. Nothing here changes, yet those small noises stretch across the still air like echoes of time. Hunters who arrive hear his voice, often calm, sometimes warm, guiding them with words shaped like encouragement. His tone carries like a teacher's, softened by age and fatigue, telling the lost how to last one more night, one more fight. Yet beneath moments of instruction, another voice seeps through. At times, under his breath, the words slip out. "Somebody help me. Unshackle me, please." He utters these inside the dream itself. Whoever lingers during the silences may hear that plea, hushed and brief, before it fades again into the air. It is not meant for his students, yet it reaches them anyway, and it reveals the truth he cannot keep fully hidden. This whisper transforms the dream from haven to prison. The blossoms disguise it, the moon freezes above it, the workshop recreates it, but Gehrman's murmur betrays what it is. These are not the grounds of a triumphant founder, but the soft fields of punishment. Each gravestone signals his burden, each blossom hides a weight. What looks welcoming has become endless captivity. The dream might appear serene, but serenity erodes when you sense what lives under it. Think of Gehrman as he drifts in the chair, hat tipped, hands folded. He watches you enter, he speaks as teacher, but the posture hides a soul stretched too thin over centuries. Hunters come and go, sent back to streets drenched in madness, while he remains, neither living fully nor gone, and the dream does not shift. Its skies remain pale, its flowers remain white, its workshop remains burned, its gravestones multiply. His eternity is repetition, turning him into caretaker more than commander, father more than master, sorrow carving deeper grooves than discipline ever did. Gehrman's fate becomes clearer the longer you hold his image in this place. He's not honoured, not rewarded, not finally resting in peace. Instead, he watches over those who step inside, carrying them forward as if guided by paternal duty, though always from inside his own cage. The dream is his task, but it is also his chain, and as each hunter leaves him behind to face the streets again, the sound of his wheels returns to fill the silence until the next one arrives, and the cycle repeats itself. All of this builds toward the role that defines him here. Gehrman is not merely a guide teaching forms and timing. He becomes the one who greets hunters in the quiet, the one who carries the weight of their graves, and the one whose whisper admits the truth of captivity. Among the dream's rows of flowers and stones, he holds a duty unlike any other hunter. It waits quietly beneath every exchange, glimmering just at the edges of his voice. For within this still world, Gehrman is asked to do more than instruct. He must also decide when and how those under his care should meet their end. Why does Gehrman's voice in the dream sometimes carry the weight of execution rather than instruction? This is the heart of what many call his chains of mercy. He was not only mentor, not only craftsman, he also became the one who offered release to those who had carried the hunt too long. In that pale garden, his final act was to lift a blade as gently as another might set down a child to sleep. What he gave was not punishment. It was the ending of the hunt for those who would not find their way back. The law and his own words suggest what lay behind this strange duty. Hunters who lingered too long were rarely left whole. The blood warped their bodies, but worse still, it consumed their minds. To stagger on meant to lose reason, to dissolve into beasts whose faces no one could recognize. Gehrman had watched it too many times. The brightness leave a student's eyes, the voice replaced by the growl of something that was no longer human. In such a world, mercy could no longer mean protection or healing. It meant sparing a hunter that'd end. And so he raised his weapon not out of cruelty, but from the anguish of knowing what awaited those who endured. His mercy was always double-edged. In his tone you hear calm, but in his role you see torment. He offered freedom, and in doing so, carved away lives bound to him by trust. To him, it seemed a kind of blessing to let them rest. But to himself the act became haunting. Each release added weight to his shoulders. With every strike made gentle by his voice, he parted not only flesh from breath, but student from master. That repetition carved him hollow. The pattern allowed no escape. To be a hunter was to be marked by decline. Some fell quickly, torn apart by claws in the street. Others held on longer, carrying scars, shaking but alive. Yet time stole them all, in body, in will, or in sanity. Gehrman became the last figure they saw upright, leaning forward from his chair, whispering soft word before ending it. The cycle gave him a father's role, but one distorted into tragedy, a father guiding his children into death for the sake of saving what little could be saved. The dream itself seemed to carry the shape of this burden. The flowers always moved but never shifted season. The workshops smouldered in ash but never burned away, and the gravestones gathered in their hundreds. Each grove of stones could be read as the tally of his so-called mercies. Silence lay across the blossoms, not as peace, but as the heavy quiet of a cemetery. To cross that field was to walk into the weight of a man's endless task repeated across centuries. Imagine such encounters. A hunter arrives, weary, filled with questions. The pale sky arches overhead. Gehrman's wheelchair creaks against the wood. He does not scold. He does not roar. His words touch on advice half-spoken, his tone softened, even fatherly. When his hand shifts toward the scythe, the gesture is calm, almost ceremonial. He pours that act into gentleness, yet the blade is still a blade. When it falls, it does not bless. It erases. The moment resolves into silence, and in that silence the mercy lies. Gehrman's choices made him appear both mentor and executioner, roles woven together without a seam. And in serving those roles he drained himself. The voice lines remembered in the dream confirm it. Between guidance he whispers pleas for release. That whisper proves his own awareness of the cruelty. He dispensed mercy, but never tasted it. He eased hunters into rest so that they would not become what he had seen before. Yet when he reached out for his own release, the dream held him back. His hand, so often the bearer of relief, could not grant it inward. Condensing centuries into repetition, he must have felt himself dwindling. Each fresh hunter approached him with hope. Each, sooner or later, risked ending on the edge of his blade. The cycle bound him in ritual, as if mercy itself had become a chain. He gave others peace, but only deepened his own sorrow. His mercy was not a clean gift. It was an anguished act that hollowed him from within. In the end, Gehrman's mercy served each hunter, but never him. Release was theirs to accept. He remained in the hushed field, watching gravestones multiply, whispering for help that would not come. His kindness had become indistinguishable from harm, its cost written into his posture, his silence, his worn and weary voice. Hunters passed to rest, but he endured, caught between obligation and longing for the same peace he had offered 1,000 times. And so the field grew crowded, its stones waiting endlessly, marking those who laid down their burden. Yet not one stands for Gehrman himself, whose labour lingered always beyond rest. A prison without end is not built of walls or chains, but of silence. Around Gehrman stretch hundreds of gravestones, each one marking the fall of a hunter whose path could not continue. They rise in uneven rows through white blossoms, some stones crooked, some crumbling, many nearly swallowed by roots that clutch their bases. In the pale light, their carvings fade until little more than smudges remain. Yet they endure as a ledger, counting lives that stood briefly in this garden and then passed away into memory. For any who walk among them, these stones hum like muted bells. They tell the story of endings, always endings. But the master of this place is never counted among them. The dream bears record after record, hunter on hunter, but none for Gehrman. He watches as the field thickens with markers, turning into a city of stone. He bears witness as names erode and eras pass beneath an unmoving moon. Still no gravestone accepts his weight. His vigil carries on outside the cycle granted to others. They find release beneath their slabs. He remains forced to oversee what they leave behind. It is an eternity that offers him neither anonymity nor rest. From time to time his composure splits. He murmurs words not meant to be heard, breath spilling into the blossoms, low and almost broken. "Somebody help me. Unshackle me, please." The plea is fragile, trembling as it slips out and then quickly vanishes into the garden. Those who hear it may wonder if the sound was real at all, but the line belongs to him, repeated in hushed cycles, and it threads through the air like strands of a life stretched too far. Beside these markers moves the doll, tending always with quiet grace. She kneels to brush petals from the stones, lifts fragments of leaves, and arranges blossoms as if laying down hymn verses across the ground. Sometimes she lights oil lamps at their bases, and their small flames tilt softly against the frost-toned horizon. Even here, gesture sits in place of time, ritual standing in for change. In her presence lies a human tenderness that Gehrman cannot expend for himself. Among the rare tokens left to her is one detail the lore lingers on. When given a hairpin from her counterpart in the waking world, the doll bends under its weight. A silver teardrop falls from her, delicate as if the dream itself allows her a moment shaped like grief. In this garden of permanence, that single response glimmers almost unbearably real. Behind her work, the workshop burns. Its timbers creak and sag, sparks climbing forever into the pallid sky, and vanishing just as quickly. The fire never ends, yet never consumes. Its roof remains cracked, its beams tormented, but it does not fall. A vision of collapse placed in suspension, it smoulders on, day after unchanged day. Between the eternal gravestones and the unfinished ruin, Gehrman watches the halves of his life, students gone to ground and the work that built them standing in endless ruin. All of it lies beneath the pale moon, the one constant arching above the dream. It does not wax and it does not wane. Its light does not warm, it only illumines. The moon is the unblinking mark of permanence. Hunters who enter may feel as though they are stepping into a frozen dawn, yet for Gehrman the pause stretches into centuries. He sees students pass through these fields as if through doors, rising, falling, their fates written into stone. He alone feels the full span of an eternity that does not break. In the stillness, old attachments cling. He thinks of Lawrence, the man who once broke from Willem and carved the road of blood. Lawrence never walked these blossoms, never sat in this frozen sky, yet in Gehrman's whispers, the name lingers. Perhaps he waits for a presence that will not come, clinging to an era that died long before. These ties weigh heavier in eternity than any chain of beasts or blade of battle. Memory itself becomes a prison cell, holding faces that will never return, repeating their absence across the silence. Outwardly, to each hunter who seeks him, Gehrman still offers the shape of a guide. His words sound patient, deliberate, measured with the calm of long instruction. But beneath them flickers the plea he forgets to silence. The gravestones crowd closer. The doll continues her kneeling rituals. The moon does not move. His punishment is not combat and not blood. His punishment is permanence, that he must stand in repetition while the world, the hunters, and every stone around him pass into stillness. If you close your eyes, you can imagine yourself in his seat. Wheels press faintly on wood. Gravestones stretch out ahead, some straight, others tilted by roots. Blossoms shift against their edges in the pale light that never brightens or dims. The workshop crackles in endless fire at your back. The doll kneels among markers, her slow gestures folding moments of care into a time that carries no ending. The plea sticks in your throat but finds no answer beyond the blossoms. Everything continues, unchanged. The cycle itself becomes your cage, and within that cage something begins to gather. Each stone you pass, each whispered plea, each lamp the doll lights presses forward toward a reckoning that cannot be deferred. The dream may stretch without end, but it does so to draw the hunter toward a single point. Around Gehrman's prison, silence holds steady as a tide. But the weight of so many markers, the permanence of the moon, the endlessness of fire, these elements press together toward a choice that must one day break the spell. The still garden waits, and in that waiting lies the opening of decision. The dream carries within it one last truth, that every hunter who walks among its blossoms must decide how it ends. For Gehrman, the pattern has lasted lifetimes. He guides, he instructs, he offers what he calls freedom. At the close of each cycle, when a hunter returns to him in the quiet garden, the dream waits for resolution. The gravestones, the flowers, the still sky, they all lean in, holding their breath for what is about to unfold. When the hunter arrives at Gehrman's side, the old man speaks plainly. His hands, so often weary, rest upon the scythe. His voice is calm, softened by centuries of fatigue. With the gentleness of a father, he offers release. He speaks of mercy, of an end to burden, a way out of the hunt's endless demands. For the hunter, what comes next depends on how they answer him. In that moment, 3 endings open, each carrying its own kind of weight, each imprinting sorrow even as it closes the story. The first ending rests in surrender. To accept Gehrman's offer is to kneel in the garden of flowers, to feel a faint shift in air as he rises from his chair. There's no anger in him, only resignation. The scythe moves with quiet speed, its arc as graceful as it is final. There is no pain, no long moment of struggle, just a sense of drifting shut, as though the eyes slip closed within the blooming field, then waking. The hunter finds themselves in a bed, outside the dream, the pale moon exchanged for simple dawn. Curtains glow faintly in sunlight. The city breathes again in ordinary rhythm. The towers of Gehrman still carry the scourge, but that burden no longer rests on the hunter's shoulders. Gehrman has given them what he never had, release from the cycle, their story folded into rest. Yet for the dream itself, nothing has ended. Its fields and gravestones remain, ready for another to inherit the silence. The second ending begins with refusal. If the hunter denies him, Gehrman no longer remains slumped or passive. He rises, taking the scythe into his hands fully. the weight of centuries flowing into each movement. For a moment you see him not as the worn caretaker, but as the first hunter, the figure who once trained others to meet claw with blade. Blossoms scatter with the force of each swing, gravestones shiver as steel cuts the air. The duel carries echoes of all who came before, mentor against student, father against child, burden testing its air. When at last Gehrman falls and sinks once more toward his chair, the field grows silent. The hunter stands victorious, but the sky shifts. Silently the moon presence descends. It does not speak, it does not rage. Its form is pale, indistinct, more felt than seen, yet all the dream bends under it. The game's telling shows that in this moment the presence binds the hunter to the dream. What seemed like triumph folds instead into inheritance. The scythe is sheathed, but the chair remains, and the hunter feels the weight of the role pass onto their shoulders. Gehrman is gone, but the dream continues, demanding a warden. Refusal does not grant freedom. It transforms the victor into caretaker, another prisoner seated among flowers that neither wither nor bloom. The third ending is hidden deeper, a path prepared before the choice even comes. Hunters who have taken into themselves certain remnants, the strange and forbidden umbilical cords, stand in the garden with more than human strength. When Gehrman falls and the moon presence descends as it always does, something shifts. The binding does not take hold so easily. The hunter resists its pull, and for the first time the cycle is broken. It is not Gehrman who rises, and not a dream with a new caretaker, but the hunter themselves, stepping beyond human boundary. In this telling, the dream does not claim another servant. Instead, the hunter becomes something other. A fledgling great one, small and strange, like an infant cradled in the blossoms. In this ascension, mercy reaches Gehrman at last. The binding that held him weakens, and he fades from the field. Freed not by his own struggle, but by another's strength, he is released from the sorrow he could never erase himself. Among the choices, this is the only one where his story closes completely. The dream unravels for him, the chains at last loosened by a successor who has gone farther than he or the church ever could. The music of these moments carries the weight of their endings. In the fight, choral voices rise and fall, words indistinct yet filled with strain, a pleading sound that seems to echo Gehrman's own silent prayers. Strings stretch long and mournful, the chorus leaning inward like supplication. It is not victory's song. It is the voice of weariness shaped into music, as if the dream itself is begging the presence for mercy, while silence waits for the answer. Each ending, soft or violent, folds into stillness. Submission drifts into waking with the faint glow of dawn. Refusal burns into combat that turns once more into servitude. Ascension expands beyond either, breaking through the pale sky into something wholly other. All of them close the hunter's path, but none could be called simple reward. Even the beginnings they offer are saturated with sorrow, the remembrance of Gehrman held at their centre. He is the pivot of all three outcomes. To kneel is to accept his mercy. To resist is to take his place. To ascend is to release him while stepping past humanity's reach. In every future, his presence marks the turning point. The dream might seem infinite, yet it changes form only through him. He is its key, its gatekeeper, its captive father figure whose role shapes what end the hunter may find. You can picture the decision as it comes. Gravestones standing mute in the blossoms, the wheelchair beside you, Gehrman's shoulders slightly bent forward. His voice is low, his scythe rests nearby. Before you, three paths are present, though no word names them. Silence hangs long between each breath until one choice pushes forward. It is not rushed. The dream waits in patience, reshaping itself around what step you take. In the soft field, endings seem less like judgments and more like the closing of a slow, heavy book. There is no proclamation, no blare of triumph, only blossoms drifting, gravestones leaning, the sky pale and unchanging. Yet in all of these closures, Gehrman's sorrow remains the axis, the reminder that none of this was born from victory but from loss carried too long. Through him, the cycle closes. Through him, the cycle also renews, and though endings unfold beneath the pale moon, something greater lingers beyond them. Because after the choices fade, after the field grows still once more, what remains is not only decision but memory. It is memory that presses forward, memory that shapes all who come after. And that memory, soft as it is, begins to drift toward what follows next. Legacy most often lives quieter than triumph, and in Gehrman's case it breathes through the hunt itself. He's remembered not by monuments or names carved in public stone, but by the movements and disciplines passed into countless hands. He built the workshop with hammer, leather and steel, and through it laid the foundations of the hunt. Yet that act, meant to safeguard Gehrman, became the same structure that consumed him. He was both the architect of the hunt and its captive, a man remembered as much for his silence beneath the pale sky as for the rhythm he stamped into every hunter who followed. The workshop is gone now, its doors sealed to time, but echoes remain. You still hear the cadence of Gehrman's teaching in the quick step of hunters crossing alleys, in the turn of a blade shifting mid-swing. Trick weapons, conceived first in his rough hands, became emblems of Gehrman's defence. More than tools, they embodied the hunting style itself, flexible, fast, daring. Later, Ludwig and the Church's soldiers carried these rhythms into wider conflicts, inheriting refined strength from the hidden loft where Gehrman once guided apprentices. Though his name slipped into obscurity, the institution of hunters, whether church sanctioned or otherwise, walked directly out of his shadow. This anonymity marks his paradox. The city feels his presence in every defence mounted against the scourge, but the man is all but forgotten. Where the healing church is remembered in prayer and rumour, and Willem's caution is preserved in fragments, Gehrman becomes nearly invisible. His legacy survives not in speech, but in instinct. Each time a hunter steadies their breath, reads the pattern of a beast, and answers with sudden precision, the shape of his teaching pulses through them. He became not a man etched into text, but a ghost written into posture and reflex, and yet he himself was stripped from the same tradition he forged. When the dream bound him, the workshop began to collapse almost immediately. No priests sheltered it, no scribes took note of its scrolls. The wooden rafters slid into ruin, overtaken by fire in Gehrman's lofts. What endures is less wreckage than haunting, an echo preserved where flowers sway in unmoving wind. There in the dream, the workshop lingers as a copy, scorched beams forever failing to fall. His life, once material and loud with chisels and steel, dissolved into myth and grief. If you imagine the graves aligned across that otherworldly garden, you see the true rhythm of his enduring influence, cycle bound to cycle, death paired with death. For every monster, a hunter. For every hunter, a gravestone. Both patterns stretch forward without end, mirrored spirals of suffering that defined Gehrman's nights. Gehrman did not only instruct them, he stood trapped inside the mirror itself, the fulcrum balancing human frailty with monstrous consequence. To look at him there is to glimpse not only the first hunter, but the endless pattern spun from his toil. Even in wreckage, fragments of his workshop bear witness. Imagine standing in its upper chamber, charred beams lean, wax drips hardened into cracks on stone, and a smell of soot clings to air that has long since cooled. blackened candlesticks slump, holding only the memory of light. Straps and buckles lie stiff at the edges of benches, their leather brittle but still carrying the imprint of hands that once pulled them tight. The silence is articulate here. It says the room was built not for glory but endurance, and every scar in its boards mutters the record of drills repeated beyond counting. From those boards rose a tradition that never died. The precision of striking after a pistol shot, the economy of motion marking every duel between hunter and beast, even the silence with which they step across rooftops, each traces to drills Gehrman shaped. His role was not only to forge the tools, but to translate them into rhythm, movement, instinct. That instinct extended outward through streets, halls, cathedrals, forests. Hunters who never heard his name still carried his discipline every time they gripped a hilt or bent their knees to meet a charge. Such shaping came at a cost. Gehrman's humanity was slowly pared away by repetition and weight. He gave his hands first to weapons, then to apprentices, then at last to the unrelenting judgment of the moon presence. By the time others stepped into the dream and met his gaze, what they saw was exhaustion sculpted into a man. His posture slumped in the chair, his sighs caught between breath and memory, his words threaded with fatigue. And yet this weariness softened him. Hunters felt in him not cruelty but familiarity, almost paternal warmth resting over hollow bones. That paradox defines how he endures. He was saviour and victim in the same breath. He carried students into survival while also guiding them into death. He built the scythe that cut down beasts, yet wielded it against his own pupils when madness loomed too close. He created discipline enough to sustain generation after generation, while losing his own life to its chains. His legacy is fixed in these contradictions. He cannot be summed in triumph or despair alone. He was always both at once. Think for a moment about how the dream presented him. Wheels of his chair creak softly across wooden boards. The air stays perfumed with blossoms that never fade. Gravestones crowd so thick that they become landscape more than markers. He embodies continuity, repeating what philosophy or church could not. He exists in a space between myth and truth, invoked through gestures you might witness in passing, but rarely recognize at their source. Gehrman became atmosphere, entwined with Gehrman like breath with body. What lingers when stories fade is not his name but his pattern. The workshop burned, yet its rhythm persists. The dream warped him, yet it preserved his role. Gehrman forgot the man in the wheelchair, but it remembers his teachings in every swing wielded in its alleys. Even when his story is almost erased, the hunt itself carries him forward. He became the architect of the hunt, consumed by the framework he constructed, and in that captivity he remains as constant as the pale moon above the dream's fields. Picture that now, as the image grows soft in your mind. The tilt of gravestones nearly covered by blossoms, a figure quiet beneath their weight, and the rhythm of the hunt echoing outward through empty streets. Gehrman continues there, indistinct but unbroken, present in every step a hunter takes even if unnamed. He is remembered not through public honour, but through the whispered, unending cycle of survival. In that pattern, he is permanent. So as you let this part of the tale settle, take a slow breath with me. Loosen your shoulders, feel your weight sink into the quiet around you, and allow the thought of Gehrman's long labour to drift gently away. Something new waits just ahead, and for now we follow the path where it leads. Gehrman's story closes as a descent into an underworld he was never meant to escape. He remains both architect of the hunt and prisoner of its consequence, drawn into the dream by what lore suggests was the moon presence's bargain with the city's blood-soaked need. His path circles endlessly, releasing others with mercy, while his own hands stayed bound among blossoms, fire and stone. Now, take a slow breath in and let it out gently. Imagine the white flowers folding shut, one by one, as the night softens around you. Rest easy here, and let sleep carry you onward.